Hello everyone, in today's tutorial I'll be showing you how to create authentication for your web application using different technologies. So let's get started. Today we'll be showing you how to register the user, hash his password and save it into the database. And also when the user logs in, how to create authentication middleware based on JSON Web Token. So the technologies that I'll be using is Express.js. Of course, this will be a node server with Express.js framework. Bcrypt. I don't know if this is actually the Bcrypt logo. The JSON Web Token and MongoDB for the database. So if you don't know how to use these technologies, fear not. We'll be discussing that in the tutorial. So firstly, let's talk about how JSON Web Token works actually and what it is. So basically, JSON Web Token, as opposed to session-based authorization, is a token that can be stored on the client and acts as an authorization to the server. So basically we have the client and the server, and the client sends some HTTP requests, right? So asks for maybe some data, and it is sent back from the server. So this is pretty simple, right? But the problem is that when we have a lot of clients, and especially clients that are not really interested in getting any data, and this is just a malicious attack where a lot of computers that shouldn't actually get the information from our server are trying to do so, our server can simply be really quickly overloaded with different requests, and simply we want to avoid that. We want our server to see all those requests, right? And there is one that actually is valid, because we know that the person that is requesting this request is authorized to do so. So we should somehow make our server know that and be able to differentiate between those different requests and select that request from the valid user. So further on, how does it work? Well, we use JSON Web Token to achieve that. And basically the client logs in, he requests a token, he provides the server with his password, which is a string, and an email, and the server then, well, the server first, of course, asks the database if this user exists. It checks the email, whether it's been taken or not. And then it asks the database for the hashed password. So we obviously don't store unhashed passwords. We don't store passwords as strings in our database, because if someone got access to that database, they would they'd have all the passwords, and we don't want that. Instead, we store the hashed passwords there. So what the server does when it asks for the hashed version of the password is it takes the password from the user and hashes the password, compares the hashed password from the database with the hashed password from the user that it just did a second ago. So then if those two are the same or are comparable, then it sends OK, and it proceeds on to generate a JSON Web Token. How does it do this? Well, it takes a secret that is stored somewhere on the server. A secret is simply a sort of a string of characters, or usually a random characters, that is used by the server to sign the token. So it takes a secret. It also takes the user information, like user email that it got from this request here, and it signs a JSON Web Token. Such a JSON Web Token can have an expiry date and basically is used to validate a user if it is actually someone who is already authenticated. So then it sends, of course, the token back to the client, and the client can store it somewhere on his side. The server can forget that such a thing happened. So basically, JSON Web Token works like a password. And it's a typo here, it should be password. So it works like a password. So in such a way that, for example, you go to immigration and you present your passport, and if it's outdated, you cannot go through. If it's valid, then you'll go through, and such a passport can be issued for a certain period and authorizes you to cross some borders, for example. So it works very similarly to a JSON Web Token. So anyways, when a client has such a JSON Web Token, he sends a request and has that token attached to that request. Then the server processes that. It actually looks at the secret and then the token. It looks at the secret that it has in itself, the server, and it looks at the token. It compares, a bit like with the password actually, same kind of mechanism here, and it checks if it's valid or invalid. If it is valid, it sends the data back. If it's invalid, like here, like for example it's expired or manipulated, then it obviously sends unauthorized. So that's basically the whole mechanism. And now we can proceed to explaining how actually JSON Web Tokens work. So basically, this is what a JSON Web Token looks like. It consists of 3 parts. The first part is, as we can see here, the type of the hashing algorithm and the type of the token, so JSON Web Token. Then we have the payload, which is the data, the user data, for example, the name, and maybe some time here, some numbers. And then the last part of the JSON Web Token is the verify signature. So it's basically the secret that's hashed with a hashing algorithm, which is called SHA-256. The earlier things here are actually not hashed. They are simply encoded in base 64. Anyone can decode them. There is no need to have a secret key for that. So what's the point of a JSON Web Token? Well, if someone manipulates it, for example, let's say that I'll change the name John here to Oliver, well, then we will see that it all changed here. You see, everything here changed, even this hashed part at the end. So that's the point of a JSON Web Token. It cannot be manipulated. And it's like a very good signature for the for our server. So we can change the time here, for example, that it will be expired. So let's say here, and you see if someone would try to prolong his token just typing in different values, well, that wouldn't be valid any longer. So that's the point of a JSON Web Token. So enough theory, let's implement this. So here we have our Visual Studio Code, and we can start installing different packages. But also, before we do that, I'd like to present to you what I'll be using to send HTTP requests. So before we do anything, just go into extensions, type in REST client there. That's the first one. Just install this and we'll be good to go. We'll use this later on to test out our API, because I don't want to create front end. It would be too much of a hassle. So anyways, let's close that, and let's open our tutorial. So in this folder, I just have the presentation here, but I'll create my application. So I just type cmd. And in the command line, in my tutorial, I will type npm init. And why? Because I want the basic version. I don't want to type anything in. Just basically, yeah, just to have tutorial and the most important things here. We have the package JSON now. Let's do npm install -- save, because we want that the dependencies versions to be stored also in a package JSON. And we'll install Bcrypt. Maybe I'll make it bigger. We'll install Bcrypt, well, of course, Express first. Express. Doesn't matter the order, but I'll just type Express here. Then JSON Web Token. JSON Web Token, Bcrypt. Express, JSON Web Token, Bcrypt, chalk. That's just for npm package for coloring our console logs. Not really essential here, and I think that will be it. So let's just wait till it installs. And apart from that, I also forgot we need to install, so let's just type npm I --save. You can type either I or install, doesn't matter. We also need to, of course, install Mongoose and NodeMon. So Mongoose is the framework for our database, which will be MongoDB. And NodeMon will just refresh our server whenever we type changes basically into the server file. We'll see it all in action in a second. Alright, now that's done, let's go and create our server.js. So the basic file, and we can require Express. Const express equals require express. Now const app equals express. Express, like that. Well, now what we need to do is basically set the port of the app. We'll set it to 1234, and I suppose we'll also need chalk. So require chalk. There we go. So basically we have all the dependencies that we need. Let's do app listen and listen on our port. Function as the second argument. And let's console log. So console.log. And here we can use our chalk package just to make, for example, green, let's say, just to color our server started string as green. So server started on port, and here we can type like that, port. So this different kind of string is basically allowing me to insert any variables I want into my string directly instead of concatenating it. Alright, so basically our server is ready. We can create the first route, just a test route. So let's say app get, let's say /test. Here we'll have rec, res, the standard Express syntax, and here we'll say res send, maybe send status 200. Okay, and now we can actually, in order to test our server if it's running, we of course need to start it. So I'll start it with NodeMon server.js, like that. Okay, it's started on port 1234, and here let's create a new, let's say test.post, or rest. Doesn't matter, it can be of course also a txt file. I just title it rest. So right, let's just post, or get. So if you don't have that package that I talked about earlier, the REST client, you should definitely get it now, because it's essential to performing our first API test. So let's say get HTTP. We can just set a get request, send localhost, and let's say that we'll have 1234, and it was, I think, test. Let's see here. Yes, it was test. All right, so let's press this button, send request, and there we go. We get the status 200, which is okay. So it works wonderfully. All right, let's close that, and let's create our first route. We would like to create the users route, obviously, as this is a tutorial of how to create users, register them, etc. But also let's create a post route, just to represent our middleware later on, just so that we can post our posts to MongoDB, and then posting posts to MongoDB will require authorization. So firstly, let's just create a routes folder. There we go. Posts.js. Here we will post data, post our posts. So let's leave that now. We also need to create a modal. All right. And this will be post.js. Okay, and also let's create a database file, which will connect to our database. So this will be database.js. There you go. So let's start creating basically our new database here. So we need const mongoose equals require mongoose there. And actually, I'll also have our chalk. So const chalk equals require chalk. This is completely unnecessary. I just use it for cosmetic purposes. So here we have mongoose, we have chalk. Let's connect to our database. So we type in mongoose connect, and here we type in MongoDB. MongoDB / local host, and we'll name it the new database, let's say YouTube tutorial. Okay, and let's create a function that just informs us that we have connected to MongoDB. So console log chalk, and let's say blue, MongoDB connected. Okay, so that works fine, and of course we need to export this. So module exports and mongoose. There we go. So that's done. We have our database finished. It will simply connect. Now we can create a modal. So we are in the modal file now. We press on this, and here we are. So our post, well, we need to require const db equals require, and here we'll get out of this folder and link our database here. And now we will create a mongoose schema. So const post schema is equal to new db.schema. We just want to create a new schema, so how our post will look like in the database. So that's how you should do it. And basically we will have a title field, which will have a type of string, and also will be set to required. Be required. We don't want our posts not to have titles. And another variable here will be, another field will be content, let's say, some content for our post. And of course also type string and required true. Okay, I also use frequently in MongoDB something called timestamps. So here we have our main object, and here in the second object we'll have our options. So I just type in timestamps, well, that they should be set to true, so that we know when it was created or edited. Alright, so let's create our post now. So const post equals db modal. So this will be our modal based on that schema, basically. So we'll call this modal post with a capital letter. I usually do this, and we'll just have post schema here. using post schema. Of course, we want to export such a module. So module exports, and we export our post. So that's done. We have our post module finished. Let's go to the post route. So in the post route, we need to, of course, require our express. So const express will be set to require express. There we go, express. And we'll have const router equals express, just like our app. And let's import that post modal that we created just a second ago. So post will be set to require, and here we exit, go to modals and post. There we go. I should actually call this modals, but well, let's just leave it like that. And that's it for now. Of course, we'll be passing JSON bodies inside of that router. So of course we need to use express.json. Earlier it was called body parser, so we would require body parser from an npm package and then just put it here. But now Express has body parser in itself, so we just need to type use express JSON, and it will work the same as before. So let's create a route for our router. So router post, and let's say posts new. So we want to post a new post, and rec res, like always, and in this function we will create a post based upon our post modal constructor, and inside we'll of course have our title, which should be rec body title, and content, which should be rec body content. So that post is ready, and let's now save it. So post, save, and then when that's done, let's take a result and just rend res send status 201, which is created. So when I'm typing in send status, it's basically like sending, doing the same thing like here. Res status 201 and send created. That's the same thing, but just shorter. It automatically does that for us. And it doesn't just send status, it also sends a message. So that's just a neater version. And if we have any problems with saving, let's catch and catch any errors. And these errors, well, of course, we want to log them to the console. And so like that. And here we want to send status 500. And let's actually also send a JSON answer, which will be error equals to error. Okay, to our argument. Okay, so that's done. Of course, let's not forget to export this. Module exports is set to our router here. Okay, that's done. Of course, now we need to require it in our server. So let's make our server use that logic. So what we need to do is basically, just type app use require. So let me just delete one of these spaces, and app use, we want to use our route. So require, and like that. Let's go to our routes, and inside we have posts. So we are requiring this. Let's go to our application, So we have MongoDB connected. Before it wasn't connected because we didn't have it used anywhere by the server, and now the server is using it via this route, and this route is using it from the modal, and the modal is using it from the database. So before we linked that, we didn't have any well, this console log wasn't present here, but now we can see that it works fine. So let's go to REST test. We can separate our requests by this 3 hashes, and let's type in post and our HTTP, but instead of this we'll have posts new. Okay, and of course we want to send a header, so content type, which will be application JSON. There always needs to be one space between the content type, the headers, basically any headers that we have here. There always needs to be one space between the body and the headers. So bear that in mind. And here, of course, we send our title, which is, let's say, sorry, it has to be JSON. So, of course, like that. And let's say title is first post, and the body or content, we named it content, and it will be lorem ipsum, just like that. Okay, so let's send the request, and there we go, we have created. It works fine. Let's now try to not include content. You see, there is an error because we want our content to be also required. So MongoDB does understand that, and it is smart. We can open up MongoDB right here and see if it's actually there. So I'll just open it up. We can see posts, and there we go, first post and the content that I typed in. So it all works just fine. So we can close off that and that for now. Okay, so let's create a new route for our users. So users.js. Also, we need a modal user.js, and our user will be very similar to the post. We'll just have user schema here, and not title but email and password. And the timestamps can stay. And of course, user will be a user, and it will use a user schema. And of course, we want to export that. Okay, looks okay. So in this file, we will be handling the users, so things like logging in, registering, and of course deleting users. So firstly, let's import Express. So I have my snippet for that. There we go. And const router equals Express, like that. Okay, so there we are. We have our router set up. Let's start writing the post request for registration, let's say. So let's say registration here. So in the registration, we will be, let's just close that window. We'll be having, of course, router dot post slash users slash registration. That's it. And we'll be having a function res the standard Express syntax. And of course, we need to import our user modal. So let's do that. Const user equals require modal and user. That's it. All right. So let's of course also module exports, and it will be set to router. Okay, there we go. So we export that, and of course, let's go to the server, and already we can import that file also into the server. So require users. All right, so we are having this file now connected to the server, and let's fill in this route. So what we need to do in this route is we need to create registration first. So when we are registering someone, we need to actually check first if that email that someone, for example, submits in a registration form, we need to check if the email they're using is actually already occupied by someone else, so that we don't have two users with the same mail, because that would obviously create a lot of issues. So we need to find a user, and we'll search by the email that we get from the request body. So rec body email. And upon finding it, exec, we need to type in exec to execute it, and then we type then. So upon finding it, we have users and a function. So this find method actually returns an array of users. If it found no users, then it will basically return an empty array. If it found one user with corresponding email, it will return that user. And if it found more, which would be a big problem in our database, it will of course return more. So we are aiming for creating a scenario in which actually we don't find any users at all, and we have an empty array. Then we can register that person. In the case if we do get a user, an email here in this array, well, then we want to return a statement that this email is already taken. So what we can do here is we can type an if statement. So if users length, so the length of that array, is higher or equal to 1, so if it has more or 1 users in it, then we want to return out of this function and return with res status of 409, which is conflict basically in HTTP codes. And also we'd like to return some JSON explaining what the conflict is about. So let's say message email already taken. Okay, so all right, now we can close that. So if we get past this if block, it means that the array was empty and that this email has not yet been used by anyone. So in the else block here, we can register the user here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to import our Bcrypt library equals require Bcrypt. With Bcrypt, we can hash our password basically before saving it into the database. So let's do that. Bcrypt hash, and we'll be hashing the password that we get from the request. So request body password. Here is in the second argument, we type in the number, how strong we want the hash to be. Please note that the lower the number, the less strong it will be. However, the less time it will take to hash. So the standard hashing number, the number of rounds or salts, however you want to call it, is 10. So that's what I'll use here. It's effective with 10. And as the third argument, we'll have a callback function. So let's type in function. And of course, I'm using different functions. Sometimes I'm using the ES6 function. Sometimes I use the old function. Doesn't really matter as long as the function syntax is correct. So the function will get an error if there is any, and a hash. So inside of that function, if we get an error, we of course want to display it somehow. So we will return out of this function with a status of 500, which is internal server error. And we'd like to actually send this error over, so we'll have error of this argument here. And if we don't get an error, so outside of this block, let's type an else statement, and inside of the else, it means that there was no error and we can use our hash. So let's create a user, and for that we'll use a constructor that is linked to this modal that we wrote earlier here in the database. So let's create a const user equals new user, and inside we'll populate it with the fields that we got in our request. So of course email, which will be rec body email, and the password, which will be our hash. So our hashed version of the password, because you never want to save your normal password. So like, for example, if I typed this here, but password, this would be directly taking the password from the request body, and it would be simply a string. Like, for example, if someone writes his own password, like for example, password1, which is a terrible password. But anyways, you should never store passwords like this in your database. If you get a security breach, if some employee gets access to a database, he has all the keys to all the accounts. So instead, that's why we use Bcrypt. We just want to hash our password. So I'll just quickly delete that and leave that hash that we got from this Bcrypt hash function, so that someone cannot just type in the hash. The hash is used for comparison, as we'll later see when we log in the user. So now that we have the user here, let's save him. So user.save. This is another Mongoose method. And then when the user is saved, we want to get the result in a function, arrow function, and res send status of 201, which means created. However, if we have any problems, any errors, we want to catch those errors and get the error and res status 500, which is exactly internal server error, and of course send this error over to the client too, so that he knows what's going on. Okay, so now that we have that done, we are exporting our user. Everything is done here. So let's start our server again. So I'll just reveal in File Explorer. So this is where my tutorial is. cmd, and open up the terminal and type in node mon server.js. So the server is started, we are connected to MongoDB, and let's file our request. Let's post our request. So there we are. We are going to our testing site, and we will be actually posting a very similar request, so I'll copy that. But instead of posts new, we actually want to users registration. That should be our path, so I'll just edit it really quickly here. Registration, the content type is the same, but the email now is, let's say, first at test.com, and not content but password. Let's say that someone has a password like this, password. So let's send this request over, and the response is created, which means that we have created our user. Let's see that in MongoDB, if we actually do have our user created. Let's go to users, which is a new collection. That's what it's called in MongoDB. And as we can see, indeed, we have first at test, and the password is indeed a hash. That's what it looks like. So we have successfully registered a user. And now we can close off this response window, and we can start working on logging the user in. So I'll just go down here And I will, well, first before logging in, we should actually also, if we can add users, let's also handle user deletion. So let's do that quickly before we do the login route. So router delete, and if we get, let's say /users delete and the ID of the user, so let's say user ID, and here we'll have request response, and it will be of course a function. So inside we'll have another method called user remove, and we'll remove it by the ID. So the ID, this variable is what actually is always assigned in MongoDB to any object you create, any modal. It is automatically assigned, and it looks like that. It is undercolon and ID. So here we have ID is equal to request params dot user ID. So the same thing that we have here. So we try to remove. Let's exec that. And then when that is done, we get the response. And we can respond with the status of 200, which is okay. And JSON user, maybe message, user deleted. So that's all right. And if we of course have any problems, any errors, we'll want to catch them, get the error here into our function, and inside the function we want to log this error and also res with a status of 500, which is internal server error, and send back the error. So error equals error. Okay. I think we're done here. So obviously we need to create our logging in module later with JSON Web Token, because anyone right now in our API could just type in this. If he knows the user ID, he can delete any account. He doesn't even have to be authorized for that. So that is a major flaw that we'll of course be fixing later on. I'll just type in deletion here, user deletion. Okay, let's try this out. So I'll register a second user. And by the way, let's check if we can register a user based on this, if we paste in an email that has been already taken. We already know that this email exists here in our database, so let's see if our API will detect this. So we send, and we get the message, email is already taken. So it works wonderfully. So let's say not first, but second. Okay, and try to maybe change the password. The password could be the same, but let's say that we'll have a test password here. Let's send the request. We get created again. So now let's try to delete such a user from our database. So of course we'll have delete, and here we'll have this, and let me just quickly look. Users delete. Oh, actually we have user and users here, so let's just type this S here. Delete user ID. Okay, so users delete, and here we have to put the ID. So let's refresh our database. Here is our second user that I registered a second ago. Let's take his ID and paste it in here, and let's try to delete. User deleted, so it works fine. Now that we have that done, let's go over to logging in and our JSON Web Token. So logging in. So of course it will be a post request. So router post, and here we'll have the path users, maybe /users /login, we'll have a function which will have rec, res, and it will be an arrow function. Okay, so first we need to find if this email that someone is trying to log in with actually exists. Pretty similar as what we did with the registration, but here we actually want this email to exist. We want this find function that I'll use now, so user find. I want this function to work. I want this function to return us a user because we want this user to be logged in. We want then to check his hashed password against our password that we get from the request. So if we find no users, then we'll send an error or something like this. So let's find a user again by his email. So email rec body email, and then we need to exec this, of course, and then we get a user. Let's say a users, because this always returns an array of users. So we get the users, and if the user's length is less than 1, so if we get basically less than 1, so 0 or even -1, which is of course impossible, but if we get less than 1, which is 0, if we don't get a user, then we want to return out of this function with a res status, or actually even send status of 404, which is no such email exists. Now you might want to type in here 401, which is unauthorized. However, well, if you wouldn't want anyone to get the information that such email doesn't exist, but well, it's up to you really. I just prefer to inform the user that such an account hasn't been created, so that he knows where he's at. But of course, the more information you give out about your database and everything, well, the less secure, I suppose, the database is. Okay, let's move on. So now, if we have passed this if block successfully, if the user length was bigger than 0, then we can actually compare the password that we get from the request. So let's do that. We use, of course, the bcrypt for that. Bcrypt compare, and we compare the rec body password. So the password that we get in the request, we compare it with user 0 password, and we get a callback function which contains error if there are any, or is equal. Then let's create that function. Okay, so this obviously is accessing it should be users here. We are accessing this array here, the first index, which is actually index number 0, the first user, and we get his password. The first and only, obviously, because we should have only one email linked to one user in our database, which we have defined previously. So then we get this callback function. Of course, let's handle the error first. So if we get any errors, the standard procedure is to return res send status. Let's say that we'll have unauthorized. Okay, and if we are past that block, if is equal, then we can create a token here. So create a token. Okay, so basically what it does here, you can use whatever names for variables you want. Just bear in mind that the first one is the variable that we use for errors. The second one is, for example, I could name it result. And basically, if this variable is true, then the comparison was successful and they are the user from our database and the user from the request are the same. However, if this is false, then obviously they are not equal and the password is simply wrong. So in this scenario, we suppose that it is equal and we want to create our token. And quickly, let's of course handle if it wasn't equal, then we just want to send status of 401, which simply means unauthorized. So here inside of that, we will create a token. So for that, we need to import our JSON Web Token library. So I'll do that. Const, I'll call it JWT is require JSON Web Token. Let's save that. And before we create a token, as I said earlier in the presentation, there needs to be a secret with which the server will sign such a token so that it knows that this is a genuine token. So in general, where should you keep such a secret? You should keep it in an env file, which you access with a process.env. However, I won't do this here, it is a pretty lengthy process. I will cover env variables or simply storing secrets in the next tutorial. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'll just store my secret in a JSON file that's just in this server folder. However, you should really store it in the env variable, so in an env file, which you later can exclude if you are posting your database or your server logic onto GitHub, for example. There are many people, many hackers who search GitHub repositories or some APIs, some code, wherever they can find for your secret keys, and you should really be wary where you put it, or if you send your code to someone, because they'll be able to access such a variable. So let's just create a secret.json file, and we will have here a JSON object. Here we have key, and my secret will be just a jumble of characters. That's the best secret you can have. So here, of course, we'll need to require such a secret. So const secret is equal to require, and let's move out of this, and here we'll have our secret JSON. So again, you see someone will see this in the top of your code if someone gets such a code, and they'll be searching for a secret.json file. So again, that's why you really should put it in an env variable, because you don't access this variable in such a way. It's simply more secure. So, okay, we have our secret here. Let's create a token. So we do const token is equal to jwt.sign. Spell that wrong, okay. And inside we'll have our token. So, as I said before, the token consists of information about the user, stuff like the user ID or the login, the key, and of course some options. So first, let's put in the information about the user, so the payload of the token, that's what it's called. So inside of that token, the information about the user should be his email, his or her email, which will be, of course, user 0.email, and let's say the ID, user ID, which we'll say is user 0.id. So we're basically referring to this user that we found here in the very beginning, and we're getting his ID and email, and we're assigning it in to the token. As the second argument of this JWT sign function, we'll get our secret key. So let's use that variable that we named secret and key, as in that JSON we had it under the key name. So secret key, And here we can just put in some options. So I'll just put an expiry date, which is called expires in. Here we already have that said. And we can type in 1 hour. So 1 hour is good. You shouldn't really give to anyone tokens that have an indefinite life, because then, well, if the client, for example, leaves his computer lying about and someone gets access to these tokens that he has stored, if these tokens are not expired, if they are simply forever valid, then he will get access to our API. So we want to expire tokens. Of course, the user, if he's doing something on our computer for a very long time, can, even without his or her knowledge, resend this request for another token or for a refresh token. So that's not a problem, and it gives us simply more security. Okay, so now that we have our token, let's use it. So we should actually send this token and the status OK, that login was successful. So let's return out of this function, and let's return with a res status of 200, which is OK, and JSON, let's send the JSON message that authorization was successful. And of course, let's send the token back, which is the main purpose of logging in, getting the token. So token. Okay, I spelled that correctly. And well, basically that seems to be it, I think. Although I don't see the catch method for our find. You see, we only do then, and this is this, and that's the answer. We should actually also catch if there are any problems. So with finding the user, any errors. So just quickly, if we get an error, we want to log that error, our standard catch block. And of course, sends the status that there was a problem with the server. So status, send status of 500, internal server error. We actually do this because if our database is down or something's wrong with our internet connection with the database, we want to, if this fails, we want to actually be prepared and be able to sense anything back. If a server does not respond, that's usually a bad API, basically, or the server has problems physically, which is, unfortunately, we cannot do anything in the code to prevent that. So anyways, remember about catching the errors. It's kind of maybe writing code that you don't really expect to do anything, but just don't forget to write those catch methods here. Okay, so we have our login complete. Now let's go back to our testing site. Let's add a new request post, which will send to our server and users login. Okay, now we'll have content type application JSON. And we'll, of course, we don't have that user though, because we know that unfortunately we have, or we consciously deleted him from the database. So we cannot use this because this will be unauthorized. Okay, let's check if an unauthorized, yeah, we didn't find that email in our database. So such a user doesn't exist. So this works correctly. So let's actually register a third user and we'll give him a password. Okay, let it be test pass. We have created such a user. Now let's request a token. So let's log in for that user. Let's try one more time. Read test, third test. Oh yeah, we have connection reset because obviously whenever we are writing something that, yeah, we have this crashed, so we need to see what's wrong here. We have users 74 user, yeah, right, I see where the problem is. So let's close that off. Line 74 there. The problem is, of course, that I'm accessing user, and let's remember I get users, so I should really remember about this. Let's add an S here and an S here too. Save that. Our server is restarting. Okay, and it should work now. So let's let's register a fourth user. We are successful. We have created such a user, and now let's log in. And let's log in with a bad password now. So test to pass. Unauthorized. You see, this doesn't work. Now let's remove that and try to log in once more with the correct password. And we are successful, and we get the token, which we can copy for later usage. All right, so this token will be used for later usage. Now we are logged in, and everything is good. We get the token, we can store it, but again, we get the token and it is not used anywhere. We can get it and we don't do anything with it. We still, in our, for example, delete a user, we still can do this even if we don't have a token. That's why we also need to create a middleware. So a middleware is something which we put between our, well, when we get a request for a path, we put the middleware here. So it happens, it's like a function that basically is called before we call the actual function. So we can manipulate the data or return already and prevent this from happening. So if someone is unauthorized, the middleware will check if he is authorized, and if he isn't, it will prevent this function from occurring. So let's create such a middleware. We'll just create a new folder called middleware. And inside, we'll create a file called maybe authorization, or just auth.js. Okay, inside, of course, we'll need our JSON Web Token. Okay, we'll need that because the JSON Web Token has a method called verify, which verifies if the token given by the user is correct. So yeah, we'll need that, and of course our secret, because we need to verify it against the secret. So if, for example, a JSON Web Token was created with a different secret to our secret, it means that our server did not authorize this and that the token is invalid. That's why we also need this secret. So let's require it too. From our file, we need to extract secret JSON. That's it. Okay, so now we can export this function already. So let's just do module exports. We don't need that. Module exports, and we'll export a function which has request, response, and next. Next is simply a function that lets us proceed further on. We'll see it used here at the very end. So this is, in this middleware, if we put it between the path and the function that should occur for this path, this middleware will also get access to the request, and it will be able to manipulate this request and of course even respond with something. So that's define. So inside of that, we want to get our token from the request. So const token will be set to require headers authorization. Okay. So the token is usually sent with the headers, not with the body of a request, but in the headers. So for example, a header of a request is this. We just call it content type. So yeah, that's basically what it is. The body of the request is here. The header is here, and this is the value of the header. So we get access to headers like this. And of course, we could also type here, if we would like to see what the content type is, we could type this, content type, to our rec headers content type. Then in token, we would have the string application JSON saved, but that is completely unnecessary. So we'll just have headers authorization, because in the same way that we put this here, we'll just type in authorization, an HTTP header, and we'll just paste in our token. Let's just make sure we get it like this. Okay, so we'll paste it in, and of course there needs to be always in this REST client, there needs to be one space. You see 33, 34, 35, one space between the body of our request and the headers. That's just a general rule. It won't work without this. So authorization header, we want to get access to this token, so we get access here. Now we can set a decoded token to JWT verify. So let's say decoded is equal to JWT verify, and we verify against the token that we got from the authorization, so a user token, and of course we verify with our secret key. So we basically want our JWT to verify whether the token we got from the headers is actually created with the secret key. If it's not, then JWT verify will set us an error. Basically, it will give us an error. So okay, now that we have this, decoded is basically the decoded JWT, the decoded token that we have. So from the token that the user sent us, we want to decode the information also that the user has sent over. So his email and ID, basically, because we have set it earlier. In our logging in here, we set the token that it should be signed with email and user ID. So that's what we'll get in the decoded value here from the JWT verify method. So now we want to create rec user data to be decoded. So here we simply add a new field to our request. So if the user sends, for example, a post, the request will have now rec body, and it will be either post, for example, or user data. So we add that field with the information about user, and we can proceed. We can use our next function to proceed further on. Because this is a middleware, we don't already want to return anything like res status or status whatever 200. We don't want to do that. We want to proceed. If we use this middleware, for example, if we use this middleware here in between, we want to just go to the next function. So we go here. Of course, we can have multiple middlewares. So we could have another middleware here, and we would call simply the next function in order to move next. So right, that's done. Let's quickly remove this rest status. So we move to the next function. But now you might ask, what will happen if actually JWT throws us an error, if the token wasn't actually created with our secret key, or if it's been tampered with, or if it's no longer valid because it's outdated? Well, that is indeed a good question. So in order to prevent just going next, even if the token wasn't verified successfully, we want to try all of this code in a try-catch block. So that's what we can do. Let's just move all of this here, and we'll just type try. And if there is any error, we want to catch it. and we want to get it, so error, like that. And inside, we want just to return out of this function with a res send status of 401. And that's finished. We don't type next here. We don't do that because we don't want to permit the user to go to this function. We don't want this function to be available for the user because he wasn't authorized. This through an error, which means that the token he provided was bad, was invalid. So now our middleware is completed. We can link it up to our users and posts too. We'll test it out in various places. So let's type in const check authorization like this. Will be set to require, and we'll require, let's get out of this, middleware and auth. So we have our middleware here, and well, we don't need to check the token if someone is registering a new account because obviously they won't have a token. Also, if someone is logging in, he doesn't have the token because he asks for the token to be given to him. So upon deletion, however, it's crucial that we verify if someone is allowed to delete such a user. So let's put it here like this, and we'll be checking if he's authorized. Let's also add that to the posts, because we also don't want people to create posts without being properly authorized. So let's just copy this and paste it in here to our posts. We want this middleware to be also available in our posts section, and here we'll be using check auth like that. Okay, so it should be working now. Let's go to our test. We have the token, and we want to, let's say, well, maybe let's start from the beginning. Let's actually post a request for registration, and we'll have 5th user now with the test pass still. So let's register a new user. Okay, user has been created. Let's refresh our users. Now we have a lot of them. We have 4th, 3rd, 1st. We don't have the 2nd one as I have deleted him before. And now let's try to delete the 5th user. So the 5th user will have a password and an email. Okay, so let's log in first. We need the token to be able to delete the account. So let's log in with this data. Okay, so we log in with these credentials. Let's hope for a token. We get a token, so now we have a valid token. Now let's try to delete. So let's delete this user number 5. So 5th user. So of course, in this delete section, type in authorization and paste our token. And of course, we need the ID of the 5th user. So here he is. Let's just copy that. Okay, let's send the request. User deleted. So we were successful. All right. Well, let's try to post now something. Let's try to log in as a 6th user. Let's say I'll register as a 6th user. We don't have a 6th user yet. So let me just move it around. Okay. Let's say 6. Okay. We have created such an account. Let's now log in with this account. There we are. We get a token. Let's store that token, and let's try to create a new post. So we'll post to http://localhost and let's actually see posts new. Okay. Let's go back here. So posts dash new, that's it. There's a bit of a mistake. Okay. There we'll have our tokens, so authorization and our token, then content type, and we'll have application JSON, and then we have one blank space between those and the post that we want to save. So for example, we want to save title. This has to be JSON though, I suspect. So title like this. Title will be authorized post. And content will be hello world. Okay, let's try to post. And there we go. We have created a new post. Now let's try to change something in this token. So for example, let's delete this and try to post again. Unauthorized. So we can see that everything is working fine. Everything here is authorized or unauthorized depending on the token, which we of course have to ask for. So now I think that it is time to close off that video. If you have any questions, just don't forget to type them in the comments. I'll be trying to answer every question that I get. Let's go to our post and see. Let's refresh. So we have the authorized post here, and we don't have the post that wasn't authorized. Okay, so thank you for watching and see you in the next video.